This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
Aren't dependent on your probabilities. Joseph, by the way, had lost everything. You know the story of Joseph in the Bible? You can read about it in Genesis 37. He'd been wronged in every way possible. His own brothers had sold him into slavery. He was separated from his homeland and his father. His owner, now in Egypt, had falsely accused him of attempting to rape his wife. He was sent to prison for something that he didn't do, and then he was forgotten in prison. The probability was that he would die there. But Joseph continued to trust God. He didn't define his life by probabilities, he defined his life by possibilities. And God began to open doors. And it wasn't long before Joseph was put in charge of the prison. The prisoner was in charge of the prison. And only God could work something like that out. I mean, what were the probabilities that a prisoner would become in charge, would become the charge? He would become the boss of the prison. Only God could work something out like that out. And eventually, the Pharaoh discovers Joseph. He learns about Joseph, and he puts him to work for him. And under God's providence, Joseph was eventually put into the position of what we would call the prime minister. Now, that's something only God can do. What were the probabilities that a guy who sold into slavery, he wasn't even Egyptian, he sold into slavery and he becomes the prime minister of Egypt? Oh, what are the probabilities of that? Zilch! But the possibilities were immense because it was God at work. As happens many times in history, many countries around Egypt were suffering a severe drought, but Egypt had food because of the fertile lands around the Nile River. And sure enough, it was happening, and during that time, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt looking for food. Now, they had no idea what had happened to Joseph. They didn't know what was going on. And Joseph recognizes them, but they have no idea who he is, and he provides them food and supplies them, and eventually the truth comes out. And the sons discover what happened, and now the sons think that they're going to be killed. And Joseph responds to them with this statement in Genesis chapter 50, verses 19 and 20. We'll look at this later on in our study in Genesis. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is being done, what is now being done, the saving of many lives." The probability was that Joseph would die in prison. The possibility was that he would save lives. That must have rocked their world. Notice 4 things that you need to remember about God's possibilities in your time of difficulty. 4 things that happen here. Number 1, first of all, don't panic. Don't panic. In your crisis, don't panic. God is in control, and while the circumstances may not seem like it, God is in control. He has never been controlled by the circumstances. He is in control. He has never been controlled by the circumstances. Number 2, ask yourself the very same question that Joseph asked. Am I in the place of God? In other words, am I in God's will? Now be very careful that decision is not based on your circumstances. Make sure that you don't define God's will by your circumstances. Circumstances can be changed and will change. They're not a fair guideline to determine what God's will is and what He's thinking. After all, Joseph had horrible circumstances, but he was right where God could use him. Thirdly, even when you suffer the consequences of your own sin or someone else's sin, God can use that to put you in a place where He can use you. If God did that with Joseph, He could certainly do that with you. And fourthly, never underestimate what God can accomplish by what you're going through right now. Never underestimate what God is up to. Never underestimate what God can do based on what you're dealing with right now in your life. Now, with that in mind, what might God want to do in your life? Where does God want to take you? What might He want to accomplish through your life? Start thinking about the possibilities of your future. Start looking at the possibilities instead of the probabilities in your future. It's time to start dreaming again about the possibilities of your future. You see, possibilities are about the future. When your life has been shattered, it's difficult to think about the possible future. But just because of the past or because of the present, just because it's negative, doesn't mean that the future has to be negative. That is probability thinking, if you think that way.
Looking for a Bible study that's focused on the practical application of the Bible? Check out our website at theopenclass.com.